Hello then, welcome to this damnful idealistic crusade. This is my fourth solo commentary. This time I'm going to be tackling 1997's Batman and Robin, for better or worse. I know it's a very popular title for most of the internet to crap all over, which, while I can understand that, I'm going to try and do a serious commentary, do a lot of scene-specific stuff like I did with the first three tracks for the earlier three films in the series. Of course, the film has a very notorious reputation, which has pretty much been established ever since its opening week of release. So don't expect this to be like what you usually encounter, where people sit around and have fun, totally tearing into the film. And trust me, I will be groaning just as much as commenting, and I probably won't be able to resist, face palming and groaning a bit as we go through this. But to give you a little bit of my personal history, so you get a sense of where I'm coming from. I did see this film opening week. I was a huge fan of Batman Forever as a kid. Had seen the Burton films and watched them on tape a million times. So by Batman and Robin, again, I don't remember. I don't think I saw it opening day, but I know we saw it opening week. But I remember being visibly disappointed even then, and I was, like 6.5 at the time, and even then I didn't like it all that much. I do remember people walking out of the theater, which is one of the first times I literally saw walkouts happen. And since then, I never really watched it growing up unless it was airing on TV, and I just couldn't avoid it. Or I would look at it out of more morbid curiosity than anything, because, of course, ever since it came out, the reputation was like it was a stigma totally attached to the film. So it wasn't until really that I started getting the DVD box sets that I started looking more critically and more seriously at it, and forcing myself through watching Batman and Robin after watching the other three Bat films, which I watch regularly. So now every year or every year or so when I revisit the films, I always watch all four of them. And I've kind of come to terms with Batman and Robin. It's definitely not the worst thing in the world that people make it out to be. There have been far worse comic book films to come out since 1997 and Batman and Robin. And to be honest, it does get a number of things correct. There are a handful of actually very good scenes where you can see a better movie struggling to escape. And it does have a good sense of Batman's character, and you can't exactly say that about films that have followed, even ones with really great reputations, which I have a lot of problems with. So it's one thing I can't argue about in Batman and Robin. While that gets diluted by a lot of the problems, and the problems in this film are legion, but not all of them are the fault of Joel Schumacher and the production team, who often get labeled with this. It does actually do a good job at getting Batman's character right. So again, this is not going to be your typical, YouTube pull apart Batman and Robin, which, as fun as that can be. I'm just going to try my hand at doing a similar commentary track as the first three Bat films that I've already done. But, admittedly, I'm going to complain a bit and gripe a bit and definitely groan a lot, because I still to this day, when I watch this film again, I can't help but just go, why did anybody do this? And it's taken me a while to get used to it, and again, coming to terms with Batman and Robin, I think is important. But I think it helps to understand how rushed this production was, and how nobody wanted to make a bad film, but people think Warner Brothers and DC as an entity screw over their film properties today. Well, no, that goes all the way back to the aftermath of Batman Returns, really, if you want to split hairs, and that's what started them going into an overdrive in terms of trying to keep the merchandisers happy and make things in a more family-friendly direction. Even though Batman Forever, while it gets labeled with that and gets lumped in with Batman and Robin, at its core is a very dark story and a very dark film with some interesting character arcs that unfortunately got really hurt by the theatrical edit that cut out a lot of the subplots. So Batman and Robin does not have that. There are one or two brief flashes that are the best scenes in the film, and where you can get a sense of where they were going. But I think the biggest hurdle is the fact that this film was so completely rushed and done entirely at the auspices of the studio and the merchandising partners, and with words being thrown about like the notion of making everything, quote, toyetic, end quote, which is something Joel Schumacher talks about as a word he wasn't even aware existed until the production started. So you can definitely tell there are things designed just simply to sell action figures. The overall intelligence level of the film is dumbed down to a ridiculously low level. And so you get a lot of things labeling it as being more in line with the 1966 television series. But I think the issue for me has always been, while yes, there's a lot more obvious elements in line with the 66 series, what it doesn't have is the wit of the 66 series. Batman and Robin, unfortunately, is much like a flat soda in that it feels flat. It never has an energy to it, and it never has an intelligence and a spark or even a twinkle in the eye. What you find eventually is you have to find enjoyment in its badness, or it being a cult classic now, or people liking it so much, laughing at it, that they come to enjoy laughing at it, which is, of course, not what was originally intended. And people label it as being camp, but again, I don't think it quite achieves that, and I think that's due to the fact that this production was so rushed and there were so many cooks in the kitchen, and nobody was really able to ever get off on a good footing. And, a bunch of other stuff happened, which I'll try to cover in this commentary while groaning, of course. But again, it is not the worst film ever made. It is not the worst thing in the world. And I kind of get tired of hearing that over and over and over again. There are a couple good scenes in there. There are some good ideas. I think what I reacted to most as a kid, and what I still react to a lot, is it unfortunately literally repeats a lot of what happened in Batman Forever thematically. It follows a lot of Batman Forever's structure, which makes it feel like a flat ripoff of the previous film. That even extended to the action figure line, because some of the action figures were actually literal repaints of Batman Forever figures. And it's even in the score. Elliot Goldenthal returns, and some of the score pieces are direct lifts from the Batman Forever score, which is really infuriating. And it's just like, I'll mention it in a few points where it's always bugged me. But again, I'm sure that really attributes to the very rushed production schedule. So I wanted to get that out of the way so you get a sense of where I'm coming from. And so if you stumble into this commentary and you're wondering, why is this person trying to like rationalize Batman and Robin? Well, that's why. Again, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. It's really not. There are far worse comic book films that we've gotten since the onslaught of the popularity of the comic book film really taking over the landscape of motion pictures and cinema in general. So, you can't label this as a film that doesn't have money on the screen and it doesn't have interesting visuals and stuff going on. There is stuff going on. There's a lot of practical stuff. There's real sets and costumes and, of course, neon lighting. There is some CG usage because, of course, this was 1997 after all, but it's definitely, got actual stuff going on, which, today you're lucky if you have anything besides an actor covered in little tiny balls in front of a green screen. So that's another thing. So I just wanted to give a little preface before we jump into it. And again, this is not meant to be a definitive, super informal, informational track, because unlike the previous films, there's not a bunch of different script drafts. There's not a whole lot of different versions or anything. What you get on the screen is pretty much what they wound up with. There were some different casting decisions and things that happened, but not all that much. And again, no one wanted to make a bad film, but the whole direction was the studio's insistence. And, had it been anybody else, they would have had to do the same thing, and the results probably would have been the same. So you can lay pretty much all the blame at the feet of Warner Brothers as a studio. And again, the whole meddling around with their franchises, it really started post-Batman Returns, and the whole backlash from the merchandisers especially about the dark tone of the film really scaring off that lucrative merchandising dollar. And that's what, kind of put Warner Brothers into a panic mode. So I also find it kind of ironic that they freaked about that, but yet, when The Dark Knight came out, which is not a film for children whatsoever, it had tons of toys and action figures and merchandising, because, you can't miss a Batman film as a merchandising opportunity. But, I guess we've now moved past that, since most of these comic films are extraordinarily dark for no real reason, and yet they still try and market and sell, toys to children. So it's kind of funny how we've progressed over time to where things that used to matter a lot now don't really seem to matter at all. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into it. And again, I will be just trying to do a running commentary with various thoughts that come to mind every time I rewatch this film. All the groanable moments, all of the goofiness, and then I'll try to highlight what I think are some of the interesting and actual good moments in the film, which there are, again, at least a handful, primarily revolving around the same subplot. If you know the film, you probably know what I'm referring to. So take whichever version of the film you want to pull up and go ahead and cue it to the 0 minute, 0 second mark, which should be a black screen. And again, this is just a rough sync and a rough commentary, so don't worry if it's not exactly synchronized. So go ahead and sync up your copies. And in 4, 3, 2, 1, press play now. So we're on the Warner Brothers shield, which will morph once again into the Bat logo. This one being a bit more complex because, of course, CGI had improved by now, and it's frozen over because we're dealing with Mr. Freeze. Elliot Goldenthal's theme is basically a slight revamping of his Forever theme, which is, how most of the score is, unfortunately. We do have the return of the flying titles. What I do hate in this title sequence is how every actor name has a slight, goofy, cheesy sound effect. Like here, Robbins will have a motorcycle, trying to simulate the Redbird, I guess. And then Uma Thurman has the little, ivy noise. It's just really annoying. So, yes. Already you can see we're linking to Batman Forever in terms of the opening titles and the music. So, if you walked into the theater, you knew what you were getting into. And this, isn't bad, but as soon as this opening title comes in, we have something similar to the I'll Get Drive-Through line, but far, far worse. Now we have the suit up, which goes way overboard. With the little zooms, and then we have the bat butt shot and the crotch shot, and we get one for Robin. This just keeps going and going and going, and so as soon as the movie starts what you're getting into. This is way too overdone and induces laughter, or just face palming. So we have a similar reveal of the Batmobile on the turntable, which this is the new Batmobile, which I've always felt is kind of goofy because it's open top and it's super long and everything, but it's just what they went for, I guess. The Batsuit is a bit revamped over the main Batman Forever Batsuit. You do have the sculpted muscles and everything. The nipples are more prominent, but the Robin suit is really great. I like what they did with the dark red and suggesting the Nightwing design. So, so far, you can tell that it's a little bit off from what came before, but here, the first dialogue, it's just the chicks dig the car. This is why Superman works alone. It's like, but it's so flat. Again, the one descriptive word of Batman and Robin is flat. That's its biggest problem. It does not have the wit or the sparkle of the Batman 66 series, which had that satirical edge, which is what made it play for adult audiences in the 60s. So what you have here is actually, in a lot of ways, much more in line with the comics of, say, maybe the 50s and into the early 60s before the relaunch happened around the time of the 66 show. So this is the stuff that was, under the era of the Comics Code Authority, where you couldn't really tell any decent stories anymore. And really quick here, you see Alfred having a moment to himself, which of course lets you know that his health is not in good shape, which sets up the Alfred subplot of the film, which is the single best thing about the film and is where all of the good scenes I mentioned before come from. Now, here you have an actual direct link to Commissioner Gordon in the Batmobile. This is, right out of the Batman 66 series, or, the comics of the 50s and 60s. So I also think it's silly how Batman and Robin ride side by side. It's like, why doesn't the Batmobile, why isn't it a two-seater? Again, talking about following the structure forever, we open on an action sequence where the villain is attacking somewhere. This time it's the Gotham Museum of Art. And Mr. Freeze is set up basically like Two-Face, in that he's the pre-established villain with the backstory we get, who's the villain for Batman, whereas Poison Ivy will be the villain for Bruce Wayne. So again, it's the forever formula, which I think, again, they were making a sequel, sure, but, it's really obvious when you start to think about it. And again, I think this film was so rushed that it definitely did not help. And of course, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger cast as Mr. Freeze. Originally, discussions were talking about having Sir Patrick Stewart do a much darker, much more comic accurate version. But I don't actually mind Schwarzenegger as Freeze, and in the more serious moments, he actually works quite well. And of course, the suit and the makeup are really, really impressive, and were hard to deal with physically as well. But the turn into parody with the constant ice puns, you get to where you adore them, and I, of course, make fun of them and quote them all the time. But and here, Batman's entrance, we have a skylight break, but Clooney's line delivery, again, is so flat and just uninvested. And then we have the goofy slide down the dinosaur, and while this is an action sequence with a lot of stuff going on, it just feels so underbaked and like they're just doing stuff because they got to have an action scene. And here we have Robin come through over dramatically for no reason, obviously by gun wires there. Again, the notion of it's nothing that's actually dramatically motivated going on here. It's just, stuff happening, and you've got a lot of nice bright colors, and it looks like a comic book. And like the dialogue there, grab the gem, kill the heroes, and we got to have an entire Freeze gang on ice skates. It's like, why is this a thing? Why would they be prepared for this? It's you can't ask logical questions of this movie. Just don't. If you do, you're really going to hurt your brain. So you have to just look at this more of as an experience after this point, especially. Yes, the hockey team from hell. So, again, I'm kind of at a loss for what to discuss. You have pretty well staged action, but there's not really much motivation, which keeps you from caring all that much. So it does kind of have a little bit of the constant punch-em-ups from the 66 series, where every time Batman and Robin would encounter villains, it just turned into fisticuffs with the, words across the screen, the biff, pam, wow, which you could superimpose over this, and, it kind of would go with it. But again, this does not have that intelligence behind it that most episodes of 66 did. And again, that's because this whole production was just totally rushed and micromanaged and test screened and, focus grouped, so everybody liked to blame Joel Schumacher, and still to this day do. And, had it been me or anybody else, people would have done it differently because everybody has different opinions. But the mandate from the studio was the same, and they're, of course, footing the bill, so you have to do what they order. I also think it's strange having the Elliot Goldenthal music over these scenes, because it's reprising everything for Batman Forever, and it's pretty serious music that is actually good Batman music, but it doesn't quite fit what's going on screen. And while we still have the great colorful lighting, and Stephen Goldblatt returns for Batman Forever, it looks so much flatter. Again, the descriptive term of flatness, I think, describes this film in every single sense. And although this was a film that had a $60 million higher budget than Batman Forever and a lot more expectations, it really does not look nearly as good. It's definitely not as polished. And Batman Forever was rushed as well, but basically all of the troubles they had on Batman Forever got compounded to a high degree for Batman and Robin. And in some of the long shots, you can really tell it's a double for Arnold because, of course, he didn't want to stand around in that heavy suit all the time with the makeup and everything. Another thing is his payday for this film was reportedly about $25 million, which, did take a chunk of the film's budget. And, they wanted to get all his stuff done, so they didn't have him sitting around because he was basically getting paid like $1 million a day. And, of course, he was a giant star at the time, but not necessarily the right person and right ego to have in this film. And as soon as he was cast, that really changed the whole nature of the production. I would think that's how it always seemed. And here Batman looks kind of like an idiot because he just jumps in and then quickly gets taken out and frozen to the bottom of the Freeze rocket because, of course, Mr. Freeze has a rocket for some nonsensical reason, and his plan is to just blast off in it and explode it over Gotham after freezing it because reasons. So again, trying to bring logic into this, you just don't bother. In terms of the effects, there is a slight old-timey, cheapy, hand-me-down quality. I think they tried to intentionally have, like here on the rocket. I think it's supposed to have a slight goofiness to it. Everybody likes to complain Joel Schumacher would direct this film by standing with a megaphone saying, "Remember, everybody, it's a comic book." Which I can understand that being taken in a negative way, but I think the intention was to, guide everybody into trying to match the setting and the vibe of bringing a larger-than-life experience to the screen. Whereas, because the script is not quite there, the story is not quite there, and a lot of the actors are kind of doing different things, it doesn't exactly play very well. So if everybody was going for all-out camp factor and there was a bit more wit to the script, you would have something, again, much more in line with the Batman 66 series, which everybody likes to compare this to, but it's really an unfair comparison. There's a lot of surface details and visuals that reference in, a lot of little things stylistically and props and little character bits, but in terms of the writing, it's just not there. It's bland, which is the major problem. And here we have Batman and Robin getting into it with each other, which basically undoes the whole point of the meaning of the last movie because they're still bickering and fighting and arguing. So it's like, why did we just go through Batman Forever? I thought we were past this, so we're already repeating a lot of the same stuff. And this causes Batman to look a little bit stuck up. It causes Robin to appear constantly whiny, which a lot of people like to complain about Robin in this movie, but at least he does have, a character arc of sorts. And Chris O'Donnell, everybody in this film is trying to do something with what they've got. But again, this production is so rushed, it didn't do anybody any favors. Now, the shots here of the the skyboarding out of the blown rocket are very, very dicey. I don't necessarily mind the idea of them, using the doors as little like kite surfing boards. It's just plausible enough, and the novelization, I do believe, says they have like little magnetizers in their boots or something, so that's how they stick on there. But of course, when Robin says "cowabunga" here, that's way too much. Again, the more we dwell on this, the more the lighting doesn't match and the compositing doesn't quite match. So that's why it's helpful to keep it moving fast. Pay too much attention to how goofy looking it is. Now, the ending of this sequence, I think, is really great. I think it's much better with freezing the furnace, and then we get down to this snowed-in set. My favorite part of this whole opening sequence are these handful of shots here when Batman and Robin are chasing Freeze, and the snow is blowing it through the air, and they're trying to push the doors open. There's this sense of movement, a nice darkness right here. I love the visual of this. I think this is in line with the original Burton films, in line with Batman Forever. Goldenthal's score gets more complex. It's just visually, I really like it. And then, of course, Robin jumps through, and Batman's like, no, he'll freeze you. Well, he would have done the same thing to Batman, and it's like Batman got taken out by a door. Now, if you look here very closely, I've always felt like the frozen Robin looks a bit suspiciously like the Jim Carrey Riddler from Batman Forever, particularly the ending when he's been, deboxed by his own creation with the crazy face makeup. And if you look very closely at it, I'm pretty sure it's like a leftover climax version of the Riddler, like a mannequin of Jim Carrey. Look at it and see what you think. But if you look in the ice, that's what it looks like. I do like the fact that Batman has to make a choice, and that causes him to let Freeze get away, which, is something that Batman would have to do, and a conundrum that the Dark Knight would have to face all the time. Not exactly something you get in modern Batman adaptations, so I do appreciate that. Again, the notion of Batman's character, I think, is perfectly fine here. Now, here under the water, you can see a close-up when the water turns red, and I'm pretty darn sure this is a Jim Carrey mannequin when it cuts to underneath here. Right there. Especially with the jaw and everything, I swear that's a leftover mannequin. This is one of the jokes I think actually lands where Robin says, did we get him? And Batman just kind of, gives that look. That is just enough in terms of the humor. Now, here we go into mad scientist territory, and we get the introduction of Pamela Isley, who is then, of course, turned into Poison Ivy, and is basically Batman Forever's Riddler character with the Riddler origin just totally redone. She becomes the villain for Bruce Wayne. She has the whole notion of taking down Wayne Industries because they originally funded this place. And yeah, once you realize that and you realize all the similarities, it really doesn't help in liking this film. And I started catching on to this stuff when I was, like 6 or 7. So I kind of felt this repeated a lot of stuff when I saw it in the theater the first time. And again, I was 6.5. So I used to really get tired of the Poison Ivy character in this film. In the comics, in the animated series, she's fine, but Uma Thurman is the one performer in the film who really goes full tilt with trying to hit the camp vibe that I think is what ultimately everybody should have gone for, but not everybody did. And this sequence actually plays out pretty well. It does have a lot of nods to classic horror, the whole Dr. Frankenstein setup here, and a lot of linkage to the comics. You have a version of Jason Woodrow, who's supposed to be the Floronic Man, who in comic lore is supposed to be the person who helped transform Pamela Isley into Poison Ivy. And but that's kind of undone by how the film treats Bane, who is just kind of tossed in here because he was popular at the time. This was a couple years after the end of the Nightfall story arc that introduced him, and he's basically turned into a lumbering henchman who, he does have the mask and he does run on venom and he does get super jacked and everything, but outside of that, he just goes around, and it's a terrible treatment of the comic character. Easily one of the worst treatments of any comic character in a film, but there's something just so endearingly goofy about him stumbling around and just, saying monosyllabic sentences and just kind of hulking around that you kind of have to love it after a while, even though it's a complete bastardization of the hyper brilliant comic character. And special mention must be given to what John Glover is doing here as Dr. Woodrow. He totally hams it up and has a field day, and it's such a shame he's only in a few minutes of the film. He gives one of the best performances easily, as an absolute delight, and he should have been in the whole film. He should have just been the villain himself, because again, this is somebody who's realizing what notes to go for, and I always hate the fact that he's only in this film for about a combined total of 5 minutes, because again, he's hitting that right level of malevolence and quirkiness that all his lines I always wind up cracking me up, just the way he delivers them. So again, Sometimes there are moments in Batman and Robin that hit a proper level that could be, I think, considered camp or campy. But unfortunately, that's only brief flashes. So it's like you could see where it could have gone right if you wanted to stick with a campy tone. And again, I think had this production not been so rushed and so completely micromanaged, I think we could have gotten there. And I think it's a shame we didn't, because you could see this working in a way, even though it's not the proper comic accurate dark Batman that everybody would want, and as problematic as all get out. You can see what they kind of maybe were shooting for originally. And here you get basically the backstory of why we're even here. This is originally funded by Wayne Industries, but again, Glover's performance here is just, I mean, he's really sinking his teeth into it, and particularly the line he has here. He's like, "Unfortunately, I'm not good at rejection. I'm afraid you'll have to die." Has the same ring to it as Christopher Walken does as Max Schreck in Batman Returns with the first killing of Selina, which is what this scene totally seems modeled after. So not only is the film modeled after Batman Forever structure, but you have scenes like this that are modeled after stuff right out of the Burton films. It gets me every time. Again, if we had more moments like that, this film would be better. But the problem is we're literally stuck with a movie with super over-the-top visuals in terms of color, but it's, so flat. It's like, year-old soda. It's just not pleasant to go through. So you really have to come to terms with this film, I really think. Some people like it right off the bat because they've heard the reputation and they go into it knowing to expect, they have to take it as a bad film or something to laugh along with, which I think is a perfectly fine way of looking at the film, but I think it helps knowing the production back history and how this film was really pushed way, way too fast to meet a release date, and couldn't help but basically crib a lot from the previous film in terms of structure and style and everything. Here we get Freeze's backstory done over visuals, and this is literally like the Two-Face backstory in Batman Forever being shown on the television screen, and you see the actual reenactment. While that in Batman Forever was comic accurate, this instead borrows from the animated series, which, Paul Dini in the Heart of Ice episode revamped the Freeze character and gave him the tragic backstory and gave him, his deathly ill, cryogenically frozen wife, Nora Freeze, and all the tragic stuff. So that's in this film, and they were wise to borrow from that, but it's unfortunately undone by the fact that, it doesn't really fit or go with anything else because the tone is so completely different. Here we have the Alfred subplot, which is nicely woven throughout the film, and the music gets more serious, the lighting gets darker. The Alfred subplot is the most dramatic part of the film. It's the heart of the film, the best part of it, and the part that is most reminiscent of the best parts of Batman Forever. It's got the most dramatic meat to it, and unfortunately, you only get it in little small doses. If the rest of the film could have been on the level of that, which is what they were shooting for. Like, again, everybody's been in interviews. They've apologized for how this film has turned out. They didn't want it to turn out this way. Here we have the first of the Bruce and Alfred counseling scenes, which is the best part of the film. This is the heart of the film. And what I was alluding to at the beginning are these particular scenes where, again, it's like Bruce seeking counsel from his one and only father figure. This is something that's different adaptations always, kind of pull from, but no one's ever done it this at such a pure level like this. These are Clooney's best moments in the film. The way that they play off each other, Michael Gough and George Clooney, particularly in these moments without dialogue, just the glances. And Goldthall's music gets more somber. The lighting is darker. Schumacher's direction's on point. This is the emotional heart of the film. And this is what so often gets overlooked. Now, when Bruce looks over and he sees flashes of himself as a child in the past and young Alfred, like, I like these, and, people would remember things like this, but I've always felt it's a little bit much. It's just quick enough. If it were me, I probably would have tried to have done it a little differently, but I love everything about these. Like, if I could only had one slight complaint, like maybe seeing the past visualized is like maybe a tad too much, but that's just a minor complaint. So now we jump back to Dr. Woodrue, and I love the inherent satire of the bidder by phone for the army of Banes, and we'll have an army of super soldiers due you by Monday morning. It's like just the right level of satirical goofiness, which again, you only see in like tiny flashes throughout the film. So here we have the birth of Poison Ivy, and again, you can't say that this film doesn't have color and doesn't try to look like a comic book, whereas later films will try to do it, but do it in post. This, is all done with lighting and atmosphere and costuming and makeup. So, you have to always give it props for that, because, this took time and is not something that people do anymore, because, they feel they can just stick people in front of a green screen and call it a day, which is not the same. I love the way that he plays that. He does his lips like he's trying to force himself to even breathe. And unfortunately, this is where he makes his exit as the first victim of Poison Ivy. And it's such a shame, because he's so much fun in this film. I wish he'd stuck around for a while longer. And now with the character changeover, Uma Thurman goes into full campy territory, and I used to find it annoying because it felt like it was just constant and a bit too on the nose, but eventually you kind of, if you can go with it, there is some enjoyment into Poison Ivy just being, the very, very, very trying to think the right word. It's not goofy, but it's definitely has a camp aspect. And of course, had not it been for the Wayne Enterprises beaker, we would have not had Poison Ivy go to Gotham at all. And I can't help but think they took this idea from Nightfall, because in Nightfall, Bane breaks out of the Santa Prisca prison. And the reason why he goes to Gotham is he was fascinated by others' stories of Batman in Gotham, and Bane was tormented by bats, so that's why they go to Gotham. So I feel like that may be a slight lift from Nightfall. This is one of the most agonizing scenes. You have the Freezy hideout with the singing and the polar bear slippers and the coat and the cigar that Arnold refused to stop smoking, and the Mr. Frosty army with frozen dinners, and it's just like, oh, it's too much. It's just it's an overload of stupid, which undoes Freeze as a villain, and why is he smoking a cigar? And again, that's simply because apparently John Bon Jovi brought Arnold some cigars, and he had them spray painted white so he could smoke them in the scene. So that kind of has an air of the guest stars on the Batman 66 show kind of bringing some of their own personality, like Cesar Romero refusing to shave his mustache, so of course it's just painted over in makeup. And so with the tone leaning towards this, complete lackadaisical jump back and forth between camp and goofy and stupid and serious, I can't take the serious part straight, like Freeze having the tragic backstory and stuff. It doesn't quite fit with the whole lackadaisical aspect of the character not being fully serious. And it undercuts the whole tragic backstory. So it's like, why even have the frozen wife and the tragedy of the character in the first place if you're not going to make that more central to what's going on? And of course, she's hidden away in a freezer, hidden behind ice cream and TV dinners, because they had to think of something that would be a frozen hideout. So you would think, why wouldn't the police or Batman think this is where Freeze was hiding, an abandoned frozen factory? And practically every Arnold line is lampoonable. I've done it myself. I do it without warning. I just break into Arnold freeze puns. But here, in this scene and all the other series scenes, it works. His performance is actually good, and you wish there was more of this. Like, I don't mind the ice puns if we could have gotten more of this in there and more gravitas, because the film so badly needs that as a grounding. Because as it is, it doesn't have any grounding. There's no floor to work off of outside of the structure of the movie we just saw 2 years ago. So where Batman Forever had the introduction of Robin, here we have the introduction of Batgirl. And why we had to have another character come in, no clue. That was just, I guess, something they decided to change things up and have a female figure, maybe, because the love interest in this film is practically non-existent. And the previous 3 films had a major love interest for Bruce/Batman. Now, in terms of comic accuracy, this is just, total complete inaccuracy, because they've changed the character of Barbara Gordon and made her the niece of Alfred, or I should say the quasi-niece of Alfred. In this film, it's okay. I don't mind it. I mind more the character being just kind of dull and pointless and a bit on the ditzy side. Because I'm a huge fan of the comic character Barbara Gordon, and I'm sure they made the change to Alfred because Commissioner Gordon in the films is practically non-existent, which is a total waste of the actor Pat Hingle, who basically in this film and the previous film puts in like a token appearance or two, and it would have been kind of confusing and off-putting and would have drawn focus away to have the daughter of a character that you barely see in these films to suddenly appear and be the new hero character. And then how would she get to Wayne Manor and blah, blah, blah. So I don't mind that. I mind more the fact that she's just kind of there and just kind of wanders through everything and is really unnecessary, because as a character, she doesn't do anything to advance the plot, and the film could have gotten on easily without having Batgirl in it. And we could have had more room for dramatic development of other characters and subplots, which kind of get shoved aside by adding in another character. So the line, we're going to need a bigger cave that closes the film. You needed a bigger script as well, and it doesn't really have the room for another character. But they had to introduce somebody, because somebody had to take the place of Robin's introduction in the structure of Batman Forever. And again, this is me kind of ruminating over this stuff for many, many years, but more and more I realize just how much of the film borrows from Batman Forever. And again, had it not been so rushed, I think they would have had some more breathing room and elbow room to work in all these new ideas they were trying to cram through. Now we're back to the Alfred subplot, and you can see he's increasingly looking worse, the worse for wear with the makeup and everything. And here Alfred is looking for his long-lost brother because he's ostensibly feeling like he's going to die, and he needs to find someone to take over his place. And this leads to the infamous line that I love making fun of. I don't think they have fax machines on elephants, Uncle Alfred. It's just, it's too goofy. And here we have the introduction of the Alfred's lost love figure, and I've always felt it kind of weird that they used a vintage photo. I'm pretty sure it always looked to me like a photo of Gloria Stewart, maybe, which I thought was kind of weird, and I'm like, I don't think everybody's ages quite match up for this to be her daughter, but I digress. And this is, of course, meant to set Barbara up as sweet and, a good student and a good niece and everything. And, of course, as soon as we go out the door, that's out the window, because she's got to go have her secret life as a street bike racer and clad in leather and everything to make her edgy and cool and blah, blah, blah. It's okay, but with everything else in the film, we didn't really need this. And of course, this will lead to the motorcycle chase. Motorcycle race sequence in the film where Dick tails her out of the house, and it's okay, but all this stuff just drags the film down because we're like, why are we following her? What is the point of any of this? And the answer is really there isn't one outside of we're just setting her up as the new person to be indoctrinated and have character growth. You would also think that they would have more security systems in Wayne Manor to know somebody's just stealing a bike. Now, this whole sequence is just hilarious. I don't know if it was intentionally so. I would think so because Bane is chauffeuring Poison Ivy around and she's having to disguise herself as Pamela Isley. Just the whole setup that they had to kill a guy to steal his car and they're just driving around and they have these shades drawn and it's just this is the right level of bizarre that hits that funny bone, at least for me. And again, there's so little of that in the film. That also comes up when Gordon hands Batman the photos of them when they landed, and there's a picture of them obviously staged, and they're getting out of a plane, and it just looks hilariously stupid. Again, that's a sign of the wit that the film sorely needs more of. And this is the setup of the observatory, which will feature in the climax of the film. We're introduced here to Bruce Wayne's public persona in the film, which, Clooney makes very believable. And here we have Julie Madison, who is the love interest and was historically the first love interest of Bruce Wayne in the comics. Here played by Elle Macpherson, who basically gets to stand around and not really do anything. So I don't know. I mean, Bruce Wayne always has the token girlfriend who we usually don't have to see or hear from because they don't bring anything to the script or the table or have any purpose other than being, being part of the cover of the Bruce Wayne persona. So I don't know why we waste so much time with her since that doesn't really go anywhere. Again, lifting from Batman Forever, Poison Ivy disguises herself as her former iteration, just like the Riddler disguises himself as Edward Nygma again, to confront Bruce Wayne. So this takes the place of the Nygmatech party sequence in Batman Forever. And it also, links her to being like some over-the-top, over-the-edge ecological warrior, which is fine and fitting with Poison Ivy. You would think, though, that if Bruce Wayne had, set up a meeting or something and not treated her in a way that made her seem like a laughingstock, it would help. But if you look at Clooney's performance here, he's trying to rationalize, and you can see he's saying all these beats of information that reveal how he could be seen as the head of a international corporation and also being Batman. Here he goes through the list and he's like, your intentions are solid, but, millions of people would die from cold and starvation alone. That is a Bruce Wayne thing. That's on point. So, it again makes sense, and it shows that Bruce Wayne has a brain, which not all versions of the film, not all adaptations do. So, again, the notion of Batman's character in the film, I think, is actually very solid. And one of the things the film gets right and does pretty well, even if there's not a whole lot of it and it only appears in bits and pieces. I also have to say, with the bare gray walls and everybody just kind of standing around this, it just looks rather dull compared to everything else, which usually has color or the somber scenes in Wayne Manor, I think, are the best shot scenes in the film. And again, the whole notion of flatness, I think, does come into the visuals as well, unfortunately. Batman Forever it was actually pretty cohesive throughout. It didn't have any moments that looked, very flat, whereas this film, I think there are some moments that just unfortunately do kind of look flat. And again, I think that goes back to the notion of everything being super rushed and just trying to get this out to meet the June release date. And again, they had an even tighter schedule and even more constraints than they did on Batman Forever. So basically, all the pressures of that film were, doubled, tripled, quadrupled on this one, and it shows in the final product. Like, you cannot get away from that. When Uma Thurman has fun in the little bits like this, you can enjoy it. When it starts to go over the top, or it gets a bit much because it's just constant. That's when it gets to the point of it's like, okay, we need to back off of that a bit. Little doses is much better. Here, Freeze is looking at his wedding tape, which I mean, it's okay. It does make me flash back to how Michael Douglas's character in Falling Down looks at his family home movies towards the climax of the film and gets all morose, which of course was the film Joel Schumacher made in 1993. I like him, freezing the subordinate and everything. It's undone by the fact that a cartoony sound effect is put on. And I hate them when people talk during the movie. Which, okay, yeah, that's a cool enough goofy line, but again, all that stuff undercuts this being tragic, and the music's actually quite good, and you get these great close-ups of the makeup. Again, it's a nice performance here in this moment. Arnold's actually working, so. And then we get up and we go right back to goofball land. And another thing that always irks me, that little cartoony sound effect in Frosty there getting frozen, that pops up in a number of instances. You hear a number of them in the fight scene that concludes the flower ball here, and that's one of the most groan-inducing things that gets me every time, are the little stupid cartoon sound effects that happen when guys go down or get punched or when Frosty gets frozen there. Now, all the dancing stuff here in the flower ball, like it's fine as setup, but I feel this always goes on way too long. The music here, if you listen closely, it's very close in pattern, and it's pretty much the same basic melody as what Goldenthal did for the circus sequence in Batman Forever. So there's very little in this film that does not directly borrow or copy from the previous film, which is very annoying when you start to, you lose track counting how many, lifts and steals and borrows there are. So some people might have problems with this whole thing of Batman and Robin appearing in public and setting up a trap for Freeze and everything, but again, you do see a lot of stuff like this in the comics of not so much the 40s, but especially the 50s, everything under the comics code. And, I haven't read every Silver Age or 50s era Batman story, but I've read a good amount of them. And, if any of those were directly turned into a movie, I think people might hate them even more than Batman and Robin, Batman and Robin going into a dinosaur planet, or, traveling through time, or all this super silly stuff. But this scene just does go on forever, and it does kind of stop the film. And on a side note, I guess it was a sort of notion to have women and other people in giant stuffed animal outfits. Of course, a year after this, Uma Thurman would turn up in the Avengers film adaptation in a giant teddy bear suit, along with Sean Connery and a whole boardroom full of evildoers. And this is Poison Ivy's introduction to Gotham and the world at large, and it's fine. This whole setup is great, and the way she looks here when the mask comes off, it's great, well lit, a lot of nice color. But this whole thing just keeps going, and it keeps going, and it just lasts, which it's like, okay, we could pick up the pace here a bit. This stuff is fine, but if you look very closely, it keeps going, and again, it kind of brings the film to a screeching halt. I think it could have been really improved had we just, from this point onward, just gotten her to the stage pretty quick. I also think, like, it's an interesting set, but it also looks kind of bare. Like, it seems plain, especially when you can see the structures of the walls and things. And I know it's just supposed to be some charity ball thing, but you can also see that they did this on Forever as well. They built some of the lighting and the trespass bars and stuff. They built it into the sets. They could use part of the actual set lighting to do the camera lighting, is totally fine. I don't have a problem with that. But in this film, it's a lot more obvious. And again, that to me makes it feel flatter and less interesting and removes some of that illusion. And that's kind of weird coming from me because I love the Batman 66 series, and a lot of times, they didn't have budget to do more than just, put some crazy paint on a plain room stage set. So now Batman and Robin are being pitted against each other for the first time, which is right out of pretty much most of the Poison Ivy stories. So all this stuff is, what you would get in the comics and what you got in some of the Poison Ivy appearances in the animated series. And Batman and Robin are thus pitted against each other, and this leads into the infamous Bat credit card scene, which I know is just ungodly stupid, but I like something about the whole Batman and Robin under this spell kind of trying to one up each other. I do like the exchange where they're bidding for her, and then Batman says, "Where are you going to get that kind of money?" Which Robin replies, "I'll borrow it from you." That I'm okay with. Like, that's just enough. But when you get to the Bat credit card, it's like, oh, and it's the expiration date forever, of course. Why would Batman have a credit card? All this stuff. So with that, I can link more towards the 66 series and having the whole direct connection with society and not being the dark creature of the night, which again is like a lot of the 50s Batman comics. So yes, it's the Bat credit card is stupid, but in the context of the kind of world they're trying to go for, it's not the worst thing in the film. And it's a brief thing. It's not meant to be something we all dwell on, but all of us wind up doing it. Freeze crashes the party, of course. Cool party. Chill. I could just do Freeze puns the whole time. And admittedly, they're a lot of fun, but it does remove a lot of the menace and impact. And of course, every time Freeze shows up, Batman knocks his gun out of his hands, and then we have another beat 'em up, and it's the same as the opening fight. Here we have a number of the cartoon sound effects that will happen, and the worst offender in this whole sequence is when Batman punches through this little thing. At first, it's thrown like a frisbee with a goofy effect, which is stupid, but when he punches through it, and then inside the hole has the one-liner of "good night," it's like, oh, that's just, no, that's too stupid. However, the action is relatively fluid. You can actually see what's going on, like the action in Forever. Joel Schumacher was better at photographing action than Tim Burton was, who always acknowledged he was not an action person. And, that's also something you can say about the Nolan Batman films, which they have action sequences in there where you can't tell a darn thing that's going on because it's dark or it's, moving all over the place. So, that is I think, a valid criticism. The two-villain scenario is repeated. Again, I think stylistically it follows Batman Forever, but that, of course, dates back to Batman Returns, instigating the two-villain scenario. And this film, of course, adds Bane in for a third villain to match the third hero character, and both of them are just, the supporting heroes and villains. And here it is. Stops the sequence, unnecessary and way too goofy. But at least we're starting to move again. After the film kind of got stopped by the dance sequence, and Batman and Robin are going to go off and chasing Freeze, but they're still, hooked on the Ivy toxin, which is what happens in the comic stories. So, I like that they're still trying to, shake off her influence, which is what they would do. This may be a bit much, but Batman having to come back and draw a dick away, that's all. It's not bad. It's okay. It's maybe a bit obvious. There, Commissioner Gordon has another one of his handful of lines in the film, so Pat Hinkle will get to talk all of 5 or 6 times. This is my favorite part of the whole sequence. Bane is the other one under the suit. And pulls it. I love that. It's a great gag. It's just enough. Here is a repeat of the cue for the chair pneumatic tube from Batman Forever, which is put over this car chase. And here you can really tell the mixture of miniature, CGI cityscape, and the fact they had this one stretch of roadway made for the film, and that same roadway gets frozen over and reused for the climax. It's the identical set. And here we go into total, make-believe world where cars are smashing through things and driving off the statues and stuff. This is the next test of Batman's not quite trusting Robin, which is a bit ludicrous because he says he can't make the jump and turns off his motorcycle, which ostensibly would kill Robin, who manages to barely stop it in time. So it's like, probably not the best idea for Batman to do, because it's most likely he's practically murdering Dick Grayson here by just turning the bike off. Like, why not just engage brakes or something? But no, we're just going to deactivate the bike. So, Robin almost dies because Batman is an idiot. I like how the henchmen aren't realize that and then die anyway. That's, I think, a nice touch. And then Robin gets so angry here. It's like, that's out of a different movie right there. So it kind of is unintentionally goofy in its placement. Freeze lands, and then Batman manages to complete the jump and realizes, whoops, I goofed, because he gets frozen, but in a sign of how Batman does not give up and always pushes the envelope, uses the ejector seat and then manages to capture Freeze anyway, which is another part of Batman's character that a lot of adaptations don't actually quite do, the whole notion of Batman not giving up. Visually, I do love this particular moment where Batman just very dramatically swirls the cape back, and it's perfectly framed, totally unrealistic, but I do love that visual. That is a really nice, comic panel brought to life. As this shot is of the darkly lit Batman kind of pissed off looking inside the Batmobile with the dark shadowing on the cowl, which is right out of the Burton films. So I do appreciate some of the little things in there. Now, they're fighting over Ivy here, and unfortunately it comes across as Robin being a bit whiny and Batman just kind of being there, and it's like, why are we listening to these two grown men bicker with each other? All this stuff really needed some revisions. But they didn't have the time or the opportunity to do so. If you do read the novelization, which I know most people aren't going to do, it's the hardest to find of the 4 novelizations. It does kind of play a lot better because you're reading it in prose and you're not having to sit through the film again, particularly for those of you who are unable to stomach the thought of sitting through Batman and Robin again. It does have 1 or 2 additional little scenes that aren't in the film. There's a really cool one where young Bruce flashes to meeting the young Victor Freeze. Now, this is the best scene in the film. This is the best of the Bruce-Alfred confrontations. And Alfred's line here about Batman is one of the best lines in any Batman film, any comic book film. I just don't even want to talk over it. It's literally... That is the best scene in the entire film. That's one of the best scenes in any Batman film, any comic book film. It always gets overlooked. But Alfred saying that Batman is basically a crusade against the greatest enemy of all, death itself. I mean, that is a perfect core understanding of all of these characters and the meaning of Batman. That is a better film. So that is the clearest glimpse of there being a better film inside of Batman and Robin. And you wish you could see the 2-hour movie that was all scenes like that. I mean, that is so beautifully performed, shot. Clooney has his best moments there, where you can see him doing a really good Bruce Wayne Batman in a movie that we just didn't get. Belongs in a different movie, and in a lot of ways, again, the notion of Batman and Robin and how it understands Batman's character. I mean, it understands it. I mean, it's there, and it just happens to be inside of Batman and Robin. Now we're at Arkham Asylum, which is revamped from the design in Batman Forever we saw briefly. And on a very goofy note, Freeze has put in an old-timey, old-fashioned refrigerator to be transported, which, yeah, it's goofy as hell, but that's one of those touches I kind of love in a demented way. Like, it's just silly enough. Now, what's stupid is, the dubbed on, drag him into the cold zone. Like, that's really, really silly. Here we have one of the great Freeze liners. Learn it well, for it's the chilling sound of your own doom. Sorry. I try to resist doing them, but I can't. This is right out of the 66 series, which did Mr. Freeze several times with 3 different actors. You saw George Sanders do it first, and he actually had a cold zone of sorts where, he had a little switch box where everybody lived in the red-tinted heated zone except for him, which, of course, it was just a camera filter to make it look sort of bluish. So, that's another thing that is a nod to the 66 show. But, of course, that was the only other time Freeze had been done live action before this point. Now we have to see Poison Ivy and Bane create her plant-laden lair, which I don't know if we necessarily needed to see this, but, we're going to get treated to it anyway. And so it's an abandoned Turkish bath, of course, that's been taken over by basically rejects from the Batman Forever Neon Gang. So, I mean, it's visually interesting and a nod back to the neon tinted alley sequence where Dick Grayson takes on the whole gang in the previous film. There is some intentional humor where they sort of play off Poison Ivy just walking in and then Bane trashing the place, which, it's charming enough, I guess. But again, I don't know why we needed to go through this whole sequence instead of just, getting on with the plot. They did get even better with the neon painting, though, for all the makeup compared to Batman Forever. I suppose this was really just an excuse to show off Bane's strength, and he can just take on 5 or 6 punks in a room, and it's like, oh yeah, he's a strong guy. There's more of the stupid cartoon sound effects, which ruin every scene they're in. Now, this is fun, the redecorating and how Poison Ivy just goes around and sort of making fun of the traditional house renovation, which I'm sure this would go to another level if this was done again in a modern context with the explosion of HGTV and other television shows. And again, while this is campy, the problem is the film doesn't commit to a campy tone. So you get moments of this, but nothing else is like this. So then all of these campy bits constantly coming back become annoying. And I will admit, it took me a long time to not be completely annoyed by Poison Ivy in this film because, it gets old after a while. You can tell the CG is very ropey there on the flowers and the vines coming out, but once they're established is fine because then they're using actual practical things too. But it's like some of it's pushing it a bit too far, like especially those little flowers coming up in the foreground there are very soft. Also, I've never been too big on the little eyebrow leaf things they used on a lot of her costumes. Like I thought that was a bit silly, a bit too much. So we're back at Wayne Manor, back to the really somber, orangey, dusky brown lighting and wood paneling that I really love. This is, revamping the Batman Forever stuff. And once again, the Elliot Goldenthal score is reusing a piece from Batman Forever. This piano-driven, sparse piece is, of course, the background music for a lot of the scenes between Bruce and Chase Meridian. So again, we're repurposing stuff from there, and it looks like Bruce is wearing from the Keaton Kilmer wardrobe of black turtleneck and black suits and nothing else. Again, I really like the lighting here, but it also shows that the Julie Madison character in this film basically just kind of is there to be there. But we do see Ivy physically manifesting in Bruce's mind to show that he's still under her influence, and it's coming into his life as Bruce Wayne, so it's an element of his Batman persona that's coming into his normal everyday life, which all this stuff does happen all the time in the Poison Ivy stories, but this was the first time we were seeing it on screen. Then again, the Julie Madison character is so boring, you wish it was Poison Ivy, and we have this nice misdirect with her replacing her there after their embrace. I always think it's funny where he says Ivy by accident, and then they just kind of don't go anywhere with it. She doesn't get jealous or mad or anything. It's like, I wish I knew. Of course, anytime you have older computer OS and stuff, it always cracks me up. This looks like obviously old Macintosh equipment. Robin sitting in the Batcave using the Bat computer, automatically will make you think of the Batman 66 series. So, I mean, if you're looking for stuff, you can find it if you want. It's also funny that the security system is working now, but didn't work the first time. And you'd think that there'd be like a fail-safe so that she couldn't steal the bike, but she just doesn't. Anyway, so now we get to the aforementioned motorcycle race sequence, which if I said the dance sequence at the flower ball stops the film, well, this grinds the film to an even bigger halt because it goes on way too long. And, I think it's a cute notion of young Barbara having a different life. I got to mention here all the different street gangs. This is where Joel Schumacher has fun. You have the Mozarts, you have the entire gang of Droogs from A Clockwork Orange. There's the one group where they have a kid with them. Here's a cameo by Coolio, who was apparently lured into doing the film he said he was promised a villain role in the next film, which seems a bit over the top, but that's apparently how the story goes. But yeah, they definitely had fun planning all this and getting all the different motorcycle outfits dressed up. And it just cracks me up. In the family-friendly film, you have a kid with studded leather and an entire gang made up of Droogs from A Clockwork Orange. And this is in the kid Batman movie. I was like, oh, why don't we get toys of the bondage motorcyclists or the Droog motorcycle gang? Like, where were those action figures? So, yeah, setup's fine, but the problem is this sequence just gets way too big and goes on way too long, and it stops the film. So after about a minute or so of this, you can't tell where people are going because there's all these lights and motorcycles going everywhere and explosions and sparks going off. It's backed by the the track Moaner, which was on, of course, the accompanying music from the film CD. So all of a sudden we've got a different vibe because there's, a techno track blaring, and I mean, this just goes on way too long. That's its problem. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can't tell where they're actually going either, which doesn't help. And you can't exactly keep track of which rider is who, because a lot of times you can't see their bike helmets. You can't see the identifiers on them. But of course, once again, it's very visually stimulating with all the colors. I've always been impressed by the oil barrel fires, and they're all green. So you have these barrels with spouting green fire everywhere. Like there's another one there. I guess those are supposed to be the markers for the race course. And we're still going. They're doing jumps and near death here, near death there, and we're still going, and we're still going. Of course, this is supposed to show that Barbara can hold her own, and she has what could be considered a death wish, and she needs direction, much like Robin, because she's basically repeating the entire Robin character arc, but doesn't have the dead parents or anything. Now, the geography visually of what is going on here isn't exactly clear. It's not helped by the tilted angles, but they go down this bridge, but the bridge is actually out, but then they get firebombed by these guys on wires who are just apparently waiting there. So I think the novelization kind of alludes that they were led up a blind alley so that they can get rid of them. But in the film, you're like, wait, what are they doing? And then dude just turns around and leaves. This is another cue, slightly lifted from Batman Forever, but with some extra bits and pieces here and there. So it's not all copies from Forever's score. So this is where you hang out line. I mean, that's okay, but the worst part is the really dodgy rear projection behind Barbara here, and of course it's in close up, which makes it even worse with the shake and everything. And the lighting is really bad. It's an awful, awful backing shot. This is the explanation of why Barbara does all this stuff, and she got kicked out of school because Babs in this film is convinced that Alfred's lived his life in servitude, and he's super sick, and Dick hasn't seen this because he's blind for youthful arrogance or something, because apparently nobody noticed Alfred, not being able to keep up anymore. But now we're getting more into the Alfred subplot. This sets up Bruce entering the scene. This is what I like about this, where she says Alfred's sick. Bruce says Alfred's not sick. He's dying. Like that is great. And Bruce is just in the shadows, and he doesn't know if he can deal with Alfred dying. This is made a bit more apparent in the novelization. This is what this whole subplot is trying to get at. And it's just unfortunate that it's not as well fleshed out as it should be. You can see it on Clooney's face. Bruce knows he's trying to resign himself to this, but he doesn't know if he can quite deal with his one father figure, his one source of family and humanity in close contact, his whole life being just ripped away, but slowly. And there's nothing he can do about it, which again goes back to Alfred talking about Batman being a crusade against death itself. So it's thematic with the other Alfred conference scenes. This is right out of Heart of Ice, with Freeze making the ice sculpture of his comatose wife. Of course, nowhere near as potent or heartbreaking or tear-inducing as that episode of the animated series, but it is a nice nod. They were pulling directly from the animated series. And again, Schwarzenegger is great in these little moments. It's just like, why did we have them shoved into this film? Or why not just do dark, serious freeze or do Heart of Ice, or, if you were going to do this, why have the Heart of Ice stuff included at all? And by now, Poison Ivy's given up any pretense of not totally going for gusto, right down to having the beehive hair here and the green cat suit and everything. She does walk into a scene and she does own it. So, I can appreciate the fact that, Uma Thurman is totally throwing herself into this role. I like how Arnold as Freeze here kind of just looks totally bewildered. He's like, what the hell is blind lady doing? Well, you think it must get tiresome if Poison Ivy has to go around just always kissing dudes just to, get anything done. It's like, you would think after a while it would get old. Here we have the villain locker that has the Riddler and Two-Face outfit, which again gives some nice flash of continuity because these films didn't have a whole lot of interlinking. It's cool we have the makeup on the faces in Death, but it's also very clearly drawn on if you look at it closely. So it kind of undoes the whole effect because it's clearly just painted on. And so did the studio, that we should always be linked. We can't just have one villain in a movie. This is a bit silly with Bane just like rushing through with the freeze armor, which sets up a completely out there inappropriate one-liner that I have quoted all the time for no reason. Finally, a laundry service that delivers. So why is there an Arkham shopping cart? I think that's the only wipe ever in a Batman film right there. Always go a size slim. Always go a size smaller. Makes me look slimmer. It's like, okay, that's Arnold humor poking through there. So at least there's a reason to go to his hideout to power his suit, get materials and save his wife, which of course Poison Ivy doesn't know anything about, which sets up her jealousy and such. So I do like the fact that at first they can't break out. This is a comic beat that's nice. Something that stops Bane, and this could stop the whole movie. It's like you can imagine the guards get in and it's like, movie's over. Okay, Alfred's still gonna die though. Whoops. Winter Eyes, your pipes. I've used that one too much as well. I also think it's funny. Sometimes you can see the ice stalactites. If you look closely, they just kind of wobble because they're just stuck on. Sometimes the ice kind of looks rubbery, which is kind of endearing in a goofy way. You didn't say anything about wife. The band can swim. There's something just super goofy about Bane jumping out a window to crash in the water below. I don't know. And then complete tonal opposite here. Alfred, of course, never talking about himself because it's not what a gentleman's gentleman would do. Again, this is out of a completely different film. This is out of the best parts of Batman Forever. And this is what would have been expanded upon, and had they had more time, for sure. And Michael Gow just performs it so beautifully, and Clooney plays so well off of him. I really think that Akiva Goldsman managed to write Bruce and Alfred better than a lot of people. I think that his writing of the two had more humanity in both this film and Batman Forever. I know in Batman Forever I mentioned how that's the first and only time Alfred calls Bruce Master Bruce instead of Mr. Wayne, and that's an important, I think, personification difference. Now here's the photos I mentioned earlier about them arriving. I just find this hysterical. They're just like trying to be discreet, and they're not at all. And they killed all these guys. We found all these dead bodies, so they're just going around. We don't know who they are, Batman. Can you find them? I always find it weird when Batman and Robin are just standing around talking in the suits, because they look ridiculous. Which, a lot of people say that the suits are ridiculous, and it takes a lot for an actor to overcome that. The bit back and forth here is a bit on the nose and stupid, where it's like, bad yes, guy no. Nice buds, yeah, those are nice stems too. Like that's too much. Here's a nice newer cue from Goldenthal with the discovery of the crypt with Nora Freeze in it. I like that Freeze is underneath. He's having to watch Batman discover this, thinking, what am I going to do? There's actual stakes there for the villain. I do appreciate that. This links in with Alfred's disease, of course, because, of course, he has the same exact syndrome that Freeze's wife has, and Freeze had figured out a cure for the first stage that Alfred has. So, magical cure, folks. And interestingly, cheekily enough, they named it McGregor syndrome, which was named after the producer of the film. It's unfortunate that I think Clooney was a great choice, and I still think he could do a really good Bruce and Batman, but in this film, he comes across as just really flat. Of course, he was still, I believe he was still doing ER at the time and was seen more as a television actor that was transitioning over into films. But I don't think he quite had that full on-screen confidence quite yet. And that, combined with the film being so rushed and being in the bat suit and everything, I know didn't help. I still feel like he could do a really good Batman performance, but it's just unfortunate in this film, especially the scenes where he's just standing around talking in the bat suit, it's just so flat. And even his voice is just very flat. He doesn't put on a different vocal inflection or anything like everybody else has done before and since. There is a little bit of difference in both Batman and Robin in this film. They come like the mannerisms are slightly different when they're in and out of costume, but that's like really splitting hairs. Otherwise, there's no real difference or persona difference that's being put on. I love how Poison Ivy just hangs out, and then Robin's just so pathetically like, "Give yourself up." She also has to have like an indefinite amount of that pheromone dust. Just like she has just bags of it. I do think it's cute how Batman and Robin do this sort of tag team off. And I love this line, although it's very fourth wall breaking. Where are all the gorgeous ones? Homicidal-maniacs. Is it me? Like, that gets me every time. It's just enough of that right note that at least hits my funny bone. But I do like how Batman is obviously fighting off her influence as the real Batman would. So that's another notion that they are trying to get Batman's character right. I do like the line as well. It's why every Poison Ivy action figure comes with him, meaning Bane. Again, a bit too on the nose, a bit too fourth wall, but it at least has some wit to it, which, there are so few lines in this film that have wit to them that, and I'll take any of them. Of course, there just happens to be a giant box that with a switch that goes from heat to cold. It's like, why in the world? But again, don't try and bring logic into this because you're going to be sorely disappointed. And then this is just unbelievably stupid, where Freeze kicks the policeman and they fall down like dominoes on the staircase. At least Gordon is disgusted by the completely ineffectual police force, so you do get that. But it's like, good grief, what do they do if Batman takes a vacation? Now, the music in the Poison Ivy trying to be seductive scenes is a little cheesy, which fits because, she's just totally coming on to them to try and kill them. Although you would think, why doesn't she just go ahead and kiss them and get it over with? But, I kind of like the playfulness of the music and everything. And Bane goes down with one hit over the head. And Poison Ivy, getting in between Bruce and Dick, is supposed to tie in to Bruce still not being able to fully trust Dick Grayson and the tensions they already have. It's being egged on and agitated and furthered by Poison Ivy coming in between them. So, again, you can see all the things they were trying to do and how everything flows into each other, like the bones of what they were trying to do, story-wise, foundationally, it's there. Again, I just think Warner Brothers pushing this film so hard in a different direction and rushing them so badly, forcing them to work to the whims of toy companies, it just did not work out. And that's the real problem with Batman and Robin. That's what it is. Simple as that. It's happened before. It's happened since. But most people are not going to take the time to look at production history and try and figure out why things went wrong. I do like this plot point of Poison Ivy basically unplugging Nora Freeze. I think it's a very nice, cool touch. And, for the longest time, you think that she's actually killed her, and that, pushes Freeze over the edge and makes him even more tragic and everything. So I do appreciate they tried to bring something new to it. They tried to advance it some, and it gives Poison Ivy some more intelligence, gives her more of a character, and she reveals her whole plot here. She wants to push Freeze over the edge, so he'll kill everybody, and she can repopulate the world with crazy mutated plants, and they'll live in harmony together, or so she thinks. I love that. You lie. And you see here, again, when he really acts, Schwarzenegger really acts. Like, that's really great. I do think the tear freezing off here is a bit much. It's a nice image, and Joel Schumacher was very, very adept at coming up with great, memorable images. Sometimes, though, it's just a bit much. I mean, I like the idea of that, but again, it's a bit much. Just like, his rage, like, turned bone into eyes. So it's this weird blend of trying to have that campy flavor and trying to be serious at the same time. And it just, some people are not mad about the sillier parts of Batman Forever, which I understand. And in that commentary track, I tried to defend it because I feel like it doesn't, completely derail the film, which this film, it never even was on a track. It's totally derailed before it even starts. It only starts to get on track in the Bruce Alfred scenes, I would say. First Gotham, then the world. I do like the humor here because you have the typical villain speech, and then Poison Ivy gets to soapbox, and Freeze is just like, what? It's just wacky enough. The music changes, has a whimsical sort of waltz to it. And Freeze seems almost like wonderfully impressed by all this. And then it's ruined here by Adam and Evil. Again, it's the stuff like that. It's like you can't hit people over the head, and the smashing of the snow globe and all. It's like, okay, we know where you're going with this. Don't insult our intelligence. We get it. Same thing here with this doctor character. He's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, it's McGregor syndrome. I'm gonna go. No, I've just name dropped the disease we just mentioned, like literally 90 seconds ago. And he says stage 1, which we know has a cure because we saw that on the monitor. So it's like, now, why aren't they talking about, hey, let's go get this cure for Mr. Freeze? We were just there. Maybe there's a vial in the back closet. Again, one of the great moments of the film, Bruce being all somber, being confronted with being powerless to stop this happening to his literally his father, because Alfred basically is Bruce's father. They are talking about Freeze and the cure that he found. Again, Batman actually acts like a detective mind in this film, which he rarely does in other adaptations. That's another aspect that I think Batman and Robin actually gets correct, and I really appreciate it. This is one of the scenes where Bruce and Dick actually get into it with each other. Bruce is trying to rationalize everything, and the thing is, Dick actually doesn't come across as being super whiny here, which I do think Chris O'Donnell does a pretty good job with what he's given here, but it's just with the tonal incongruities, it makes Robin kind of seem whiny in places when it's not intended, which of course adds to the whole notion of this film being wince-inducing, which it is. But you can see what they were going for, and that's what I keep coming back to. Every time I come back to this film, I groan through it, I wince through it, but had it not been for all the hurdles they had to overcome, you can see what they were shooting for. And again, no one starts out to make a bad film. That was no one's intention, and it's just unfortunate it turned out this way. And everybody says, "Oh, it killed the franchise," and da 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 da. Well, yeah, it did. But if you want to blame anybody, lay that directly at the feet of Warner Brothers, because again, Warner Brothers been screwing with Batman and franchises since '92, post Batman Returns. And of course, he says never open it, which of course means half a second later she's going to start trying to crack it open. Now, at this point in the film, having a charity party of sorts and an unveiling, again, going back to the notion this film lifts Batman Forever's structure, this is the same purpose and set up structurally as the Nigmatech unveiling in Batman Forever. So once again, we're borrowing straight from Batman Forever's structure. Bruce shows up with his love interest in tow and is being seen, and he's hounded by the paparazzi. And we have the villain of the film in disguise with nefarious motives going around. So while it's not the big set piece like the Nigmatech party, it's got the same structure. Hey, the commissioner finally gets some attention. This is the most he gets to do in the film. And this is Poison Ivy wanting to go after the bat signal, where it's like, does she really need to steal the keys, to steal the bat signal, to make it a Robin signal, to draw Robin out to ostensibly kill him when she could have killed him easily, 5 minutes ago? Many opportunities she has to kill him. It is interesting how we get this very sensuous close-up of the pheromone dust there. But of course, it goes far enough to reach Bruce, which puts him on edge and starts his detective mind going, and he's able to piece together later on that Pamela Isley was going around, and that's where she must have gotten the keys to steal the bat signal. Once again, Batman doing real detective work, even if it's on the fly and most people aren't going to notice it. The commissioner getting a nice, funny note of being like, I'm young at heart, I swear. Again, this is a lovely, nice little touch where Bruce actually is using his brain, and you can see it. You very rarely get that in Batman films. And of course, they have to have the Freeze Army come back. Why? Arnold gets to do some monologuing, which is just beautiful in its silliness. We all love it. We know we do. Revenge! There had to be better ways of doing this. Did we really need to steal the bat signal? And of course, if Bane rips it off its hinges, how do they get it out of there? How do they reconnect it? Because they basically destroyed it to, steal it. They had to put it on a truck, So here, the expert computer hacker of the comics will have to hack into a disk on screen and is the world's single worst computer hacker. And just as the worst password guesses, it's like, password, Alfred. And of course, she literally uses Alfred. And we're going to cut back to that several more times. This is perhaps the most emotional of the Bruce Alfred scenes. This is where Alfred and Bruce literally, Bruce is finally able to say, I love you. And he's never been able to do that before. Again, spelled out a little bit more in the novelization. Not explicitly said that, this is hard for him, but you can see it in the performance. I wish there was more of this in the film, of course. But it's a very important character moment for both of them. And I do love that he doesn't say just that. He says, I love you, old man. There's no defeat in death. I mean, this is weightier than almost anything else you can think of in any film in this type. Sold entirely by performance. And again, while I do think, it may have not been necessary to have the little flashes, they are nice. They do serve a purpose, and I love the way that they both play this scene so much. You can see that Bruce is literally on the verge of tears at this point. He leans over and actually kisses Alfred. I mean, that's just it's the most human moment of any Batman film, bar none. It is right here in Batman and Robin. And then we have to cut back to her attempts at hacking just cracked me up so much. I'm surprised she doesn't type in fax machines on elephants. And then why the passcode would be his pet name for her mother doesn't make any sense, really. If this was essentially going to his brother, why would he do that? So I have to think that he assumed naturally that she would try and hack in, which is why later on he has a suit prepared for her in the Batcave and a special Alfred, program. Because, Alfred is always actually the smartest one in the room. He holds everything together. It's also interesting that they, showed a picture of the Batwing and stuff from Batman Forever and then have the logo of this movie in there. It's kind of weird. Here is the Gotham Street set, and here you can really tell it's the backlot of Warner Brothers and, rather brightly lit and looks very tiny because, of course, the backlot Warner's is tiny, so it needed a lot more staging to make it look more like Gotham there. You think it's kind of funny having Bane in the back of the Freeze-mobile. That's, some of the one-liners are stupid, but some of the one-liners seem like they're much more Arnold humor. I like the staging of Bruce standing there in front of the monitor, which looks like a cityscape. I like that Bruce is in the tux with the bow tie undone, and while Robin is suited up, Bruce is not. It shows how they're on different planes right now. See, Bruce is seeing through Ivy's manipulation, and he's trying to reach out to his friend and partner and everything. This is the same point we got in Batman Forever when Robin comes out in uniform for the first time and they shake hands and, Batman says a man's got to go his own way. Again, we're repeating stuff, but at least the thematic point of it is developed a bit and requires Robin to have some character growth as well as Bruce. I like the idea. The problem is it's just not executed well. Which, is this movie in a nutshell, which, had it not been so rushed and micromanaged, it would have turned out a lot better. I know I'm a broken record on saying that, but that is literally the story of this movie. I love how Bane just repeats random words in this movie. Now, Freeze is amusing when he does stuff like this, but it doesn't fit with the sad and dramatic character either. So you have two different versions of Freeze in this movie, and they're in the same movie, and it doesn't quite work. This is my favorite Bane thing. Bomb. He walks around planting bombs and just says, bomb. I'll admit I've also quoted that in real life, just setting things on a table. I'm like, bomb. Of course, if he didn't say that, you wouldn't know what the heck he's doing with these icicles setting them around. So it also helps as an expository device. Gotta have a cold pun. You have to wonder if Dr. Victor Fries, as a young man, was also like a failed comic or obsessed with cheesy, old-fashioned comedy, and it just still is part of his persona. But Arnold going over the top is the most enjoyable thing about the film, and honestly, if it was just 2 straight hours of cold puns, like, it could be a camp classic in a lot of ways. So I've always thought it was interesting, the Batcave being lit with all these lasers here. I don't know how Barbara supposedly broke into the Batcave and came from below, and why she's on the turntable, because, when Dick broke in Batman Forever, he fell through the stairs at the top, and the turntable's supposed to lead down to the bottom where the Batwing and the Batboat are, and I'm putting too much logic in, I know, but that's always bugged me. Now, people have somewhat labeled this the Max Headroom version of Alfred. It is a bit cheesy, and of course, VR and simulation was, in very infant stages here in the 90s, but, Alfred basically helped build everything, so of course he could make an AI version of himself. Of course, she has no training. She doesn't know anything, but she just goes out there anyway. I do hate Suit Me Up, Uncle Alfred. It is just cheesy. And of course, you have to have the Schumacher suit up scene. And of course, you have to have a butt shot. Why? You just stop asking. We've come a long way from the Batman 89 suit up, which is, makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And it's just simple, but, if the boys get to have it, then so do the gals as well. And then here is a direct cue repeated from Batman Forever. This is the cue when Bruce is shot in the head, and we had the transition to him waking up with amnesia in the original cut. Again, unfortunately, a lot of the Batman Forever cues are literally lifted with a little bit of massaging and reworking here and there, but every time I get to that scene and that comes up, I'm like, oh yeah, that's when Bruce gets shot in the head. Oh wait, other movie. The vines come close behind him, but then just kind of sway there in the wind. Always looked a little cheesy. Now this looks like, a set designer's dream version of a villain lair from the 66 show. It's, obviously just a room with a bunch of vines in it, but it's, very elaborate with the, all the purple and pink lighting and everything. So again, it's like a set designer's wet dream of a 66 show set. And here we have the sultry, goofy Poison Ivy Temptress music come back. And now the dialogue seems really stilted here, and Robin seems like a total idiot. But, at the end of this little repartee, it's revealed that Robin is playing her the way that she plays men, so it's a nice turning of the tables. And, while the gimmick is a bit silly of rubber lips are immune to your charms, it is cute that, they get to finally turn the tables on Poison Ivy, going in close to accentuate that, oh my God, Robin's gonna die. I do like the fact that, she actually kisses him and gets to do that devilish look, and you're like, oh, Robin's dead now. And they let it play for a second for suspense and stuff. That's nice. And although this is goofy as hell, something about it just cracks me up. He just peels them off. And then he just goes right into the water and can't save himself. So much for the Boy Wonder. And then Batman looks like an idiot. And then here you get to see the bat butt in its full glory as the cape goes up. That's a lovely line. And of course, this is all done so Batgirl can crash through the ceiling, of course, in another skylight, have her own hero moment, and, beat Ivy. But it's like, you're not making the Dark Knight detective look very good here, guys. And of course, this did happen somewhat on the 66 show once Batgirl was introduced in the third season, where, Batman and Robin would be in a death trap and Batgirl would have to save them. I don't necessarily mind that, but, it definitely is not making Batman look very adept here. Now, this is the worst thing, one of the worst things in the film. You see there, they actually reversed the shot of Robin coming out of the water because they didn't have anything else. So when Robin comes out, once Poison Ivy is defeated, it's that same shot. They just put it there, and they reversed it again. And, of course, this is replayed later by Batman, so it's like he had a TV camera recording her in full close-up while he was struggling for his life in vines. That's one of those funny little incongruities I actually like. This is my favorite Poison Ivy touch, where she sees a reflection in the knife blade and adjusts her hair. Like, that's wonderfully goofy. Maybe as another link to the 66 show, Batgirl just does a bunch of kicking, which is what she did on the 66 show, because it was deemed too unladylike to punch guys. And Poison Ivy getting knocked to her own flower, I don't know why that would, cause her to be defeated. And that was that same shot of Robin coming out of the water, so they obviously didn't have one for earlier, so they just used it and reversed it. I think the Batgirl not being awfully PC is the best, wink at the audience line. And then just kind of toss it off. And of course, they use each other's names in public, right in front of Poison Ivy. Not the best idea. Of course, they have a costume change here, so that must mean they went home and changed costumes to then go defeat Freeze. I like to think of it that they had to go back and put on winter armor to defeat his, ice powers. And of course, he's turned the observatory telescope into a giant freezing ray. And when Gotham is frozen, you have a number of scenes, intended for comedic effect that just make me think of the Richard Lester stuff in Superman 2, like the guy with the ice cream cone, or the opening of Superman 3, that's all the slapstick crap. So that's what this is like right out of. Most of all, the dog who gets frozen while he's urinating on a fire hydrant. And all this stuff, the ice doesn't look very convincing. The effect of the freeze ray and the heat ray beam later on when it's reversed are really unconvincing. Particularly, like here you can see the actual city background played. It just does not look very convincing. Gotta hit the camera for a transition. Here's that same super small bit of roadway. Now it's been frozen over, and we have the Bat Ice vehicles designed to sell toys. Batman's new outfit is modeled after the final sonar suit in Forever, of course, right down to the cowl. Batgirl finally does have her actual cowl on, which gets, she tosses off literally in 2 minutes. She's on the Bat Cycle, which is, from the 66 show. And then Robin's in this weird hovercraft thingy. I don't know why. Again, selling more toys. I do remember some of these existing as toys, but they were not very convincing or good, actually. This whole scene is kind of pointless because I could have just gone there and gotten there, much like the cathedral at the end of Batman '89. But gotta show off the new toys. And I guess maybe you could link this to the Bat Shield in Batman '66, which they tried to use against Mr. Freeze the first time, or at least at some point, I believe. So yeah, you really could have dropped that whole sequence and not lost anything. And him looking through the magnifying glass there kind of has the Wicked Witch of the West thing where she's like looking through the globe. The super amazing grapple hooks that can go up that high. The whole making the room look like a planetarium with the projection on the ceiling just makes it look really cheap, I think. And that's where she throws away the cowl, so I guess it was just uncomfortable, and they're just like, screw it. I just thought it was kind of fun and goofy at the same time that they all have their own personalized individual batarangs and grapple lines. Now, of course, they're having to exposition the heck out of this to figure out a solution, but they do interplay well. They do all try and solve the problem. And, of course, complications ensue. And they are actually working together as a team, which you don't really get a lot of that in superhero films, really. So, that's another thing that's actually appreciated, And, of course, it can't possibly be that easy. We'll get this goofy bit of Freeze coming up in the magnifier. And then the unintentionally hilarious one of Batman being caught in there. And once again, we have two people falling. So, if Batman had dove after them, that would have been a direct ripoff of Batman Forever. But, of course, he doesn't this time, which is the fulfillment of his arc with Dick Grayson that, at the end of the film, Dick will ask, I was falling with Barbara. Why weren't you there to save us? It's like, I knew I had to trust you. You had to save yourself this time. And, of course, it's Barbara who has to step up and do the saving. So at least she finally has something to do, really. Yeah, that's totally what you do as a villain. Stand around and say yes a lot. And here we have the totally goofy bit of Batman having to hang upside down, so he crosses his arms and hangs just like a bat, and the cape goes down. It's just, yeah, it's just so goofy that I have to like it. So now we have the back and forth with the ticking clock, which we've, obviously seen a million times, as Dick and Babs have to deal with Movie Bane, and it takes them, like, at least several minutes to realize, hey, there's a big tube on the back of his head. Let's just kick that out. I hate the two scientists as, like, the cheerleaders. It's just, it's unnecessary. And here they'll finally decide, okay, let's kick the tube out. And, I mean, it is a nice visual of seeing Bane basically, collapse back down on himself. But, of course, it would not be this cartoonish in the comics because the real Bane was already a formidable opponent without Venom. And, of course, went without Venom a number of times in the comics later on. In the confrontational moments here, I think Clooney is quite effective, and that's when this whole climax does finally start to get a bit more serious, which is sorely needed. And of course, it can't possibly be that easy, so you know this isn't going to solve everything. Not to mention, as soon as you introduce Mr. Freeze, you know he's going to try and freeze the city at some point. Like, what else is Mr. Freeze going to do in a movie? I have always liked the orange lighting of the heat in this scene. I think it does add a nice bit of texture. Here we have the first bit of the heat ray, and you can see the effects really are ropey here. It has a very washed out look to it, and it definitely does not hold up super well. Bane's icicle bombs come into play. I like him Freeze falling and the notion of impending doom here, and then all the Bat family can do is just try and survive. And of course, they apparently just leave Bane to die. So it's like, you thought they didn't kill anybody in this movie. Well, yeah, they did. I like Arnold's desperation there when he says "freeze in hell, Batman." That's actually good. So is Batman diving, and I know I said before Batman didn't dive after Dick and Babs, but here he dives with the scientists, and we have a reprise of the Batman Forever music from the fall at the climax of the film. So we actually do kind of repeat that. So and doesn't hit anywhere near the emotional level of that, but it's like, could we come up with something other than Batman falling, having to rescue people? I love how he's just like, hang on to my belt. Well, good thing Bruce Wayne just put all that money into the telescope. And now we have the annoying scientist gone, thankfully. I do like the gag here about, need a lift. Again, you can have humor in these films, but you can't overdo it too much. This shot here is really ropey in the compositing, but it's very, very brief. Again, here you have the three brains interacting with each other and trying to find the solution to the problem, actually working as a team. So, again, that's nice that they're not just standing around going, "What do I do?" This also helps, explain the fact why they made Barbara in this film a computer grad student, other than, hey, Oracle's a computer whiz in the comics, but, I do think it looks much more impressive with the multiple heat beams going through, like they're just sweeping through the city and stuff. I like the visual of this, but the effects just don't hold up. Particularly the cityscape has always looked phony in this sequence. And then here you get all the people coming back, and all the resolution of all the gags, but with the serious Goldenthal music, it just doesn't quite work. There you see the shaky ice on the door. Looks very rubbery. And of course, we're going to have the dog here who's totally fine. Yep, had to worry about the urinating dog. This is another great scene with Batman confronting Freeze, but also trying to and actually successfully getting to his last shred of humanity. I love how he comes through the lit darkness here, and he's like, I didn't kill your wife. And although he replays the close-up of Ivy, that's a little goofy, but I do think Clooney's performance in this scene is very, very good. So is Arnold. Again, this is one of the handful of scenes I think really, really does work. I love that Batman adds the doctor there. And you can see it in Arnold's face, and I love that his eyes are whited out because he's literally dying in the heat there. Again, if we could have gotten a whole movie like this, it would have been great. And the whole notion of Freeze being, interested in comedy at a young age, here, like, he's finally acting more human again. Take 2 of these and come in the morning. But I do like the way that it's played, so, it does work. But yeah, easily one of the best scenes in the film. Up there with the Bruce Alfred scenes, and again, a shred of humanity on both sides. So, Freeze does have a shot of redemption, essentially. Because Batman is not going to, just condemn him. How about we go back to the somber scenes after the climax of the film? This is the end of the film. I like how it, at least starts out and ending on a somber note. They're all roughed up. They're still sort of in the costume, and I love how they still have some of the black eye makeup. So it's the only time you ever see any of the actors with the black eye makeup, because, if they don't have the cowl on, they have raccoon-looking makeup on around the eyes. It's just a little bit of it, but I do love that. It's a bit like how in Batman Returns, when Batman is sitting down in the cave and he's pulling out Catwoman's talons and he calls Alfred for ointment. It's one of the few times you see in the first 4 of these films, that sort of in-between stage of costuming. I like how Freeze appears in and his blue illuminates the shadows, and he's the cold, hellish vision to torment Poison Ivy in Arkham Asylum. And of course, her disposition and everything is much like how Edward Nygma winds up at the end of Batman Forever. Just without the screams. Those are implied. And we have the super sloppy trio. Apparently they had time to order out for pizza and everything. Must have been the same pizza order that Alfred canceled at the beginning. It does look kind of weird because you get to see this otherwise lovely set all lit up, and it doesn't look as good. I love how Michael Gough has this sort of, frumpy look on his face. I thought I told you to clean things better. So yeah, this is obviously where they were going with this, because they obviously weren't going to kill off Alfred. It would have required much more gravitas, and had this been a darker film, they would have developed it more, I think. Botanical butt, that's just kind of silly. So we have the resolution of Bruce and Dick's conflict here, the resolution of the Alfred subplot, and now Batgirl has been added to the Bat family. And of course, we're going to need a bigger cave, which ends the film. The notion of clasped hands together in partnership from Batman Forever, which I think is an Akiva Goldsman thing. So of course that would turn up in this film. Now, there's the reprise of the lovely charging for the bat signal shot, this time with the trio. Still a great image, a great way to end a Batman film. And now into the end credits, which have a little bit of trailing off of the Goldenthal score before heading right into one of the great Smashing Pumpkins songs, The End is the Beginning is the End. And now most people prefer the slower version. That was the B-side. The Beginning is the End is the Beginning, because it got used in the Watchmen trailer. But I much prefer this version. It's one of the great Pumpkin songs, and the best thing in the film because it's a great song. Slightly edited, and of course it gets cut off at the end, just like Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me does, the U2 track in Batman Forever. Really such a great song tied to a film that is tonally opposite from. This is the lead track off of the accompanying Music From soundtrack CD, which is one of the best ever made. It's a phenomenal Music From CD. It's got a lot of songs that were not in the film, a lot of songs not related, just Warner Brothers artists. I primarily grew up listening to it for the Smashing Pumpkins songs, and then it had an REM outtake from the Monster era, so of course I had to get it. So yeah, love this song. Interesting way to close out the film. So this is Batman and Robin. Again, this was my attempt at doing another running commentary, and I know, I've grown a lot through this, but I think understanding the rush job everybody was put under and the direction of the studio really explains a lot of what happened. You can see the bones of the better film in there, and the handful of really great scenes are really worth your time. So I think if you can come to terms with the film, I think it definitely helps. It also helps, watching it in a home theater environment, or if you ever get the chance to see it in a theater on the big screen, I think it might maybe help it play a little better. But yeah, it is what it is. It has a lot of problems, but it has a couple nice things, and it's unfortunate that everybody got blamed for how badly this went. The fifth film got canceled, and Schumacher always wanted to go darker, and there's a lot of discussion of how that would have gone. So unfortunate it turned out this way and signaled the, swan song of the original Bat franchise. Now we seek into R. Kelly's Gotham City, which is for me the single worst thing about Batman and Robin. I hate this song. Never liked this song. Can't stand it. Can't stand the music video. It's so annoying. So I can live with anything in the film, but this silly song, and I know I'm not alone on it. So if you want to complain about anything in this film, complain about R. Kelly's Gotham City. Oh God, it's terrible. So yeah, that's what I hate most in this film. I can live with everything else, but not this darn song. And of course, it's the last thing you hear in Batman and Robin. So it's just like, I have now watched this again. So that does it for me. Thanks for hanging out and listening to me blabber over Batman and Robin. Hopefully you enjoyed me going on and struggling through the groaners and that are sprinkled throughout the film. Again, it's not the worst thing in the world. I think the internet has really taken the hatred for this title to such a high level, and I don't think it quite deserves the sheer amount of vitriol that it gets. And I think, again, once you come to terms with it, if you're able to watch it with an open mind or from a different mindset, particularly understanding the gun everybody was under, I think that helps immensely. It also would be a better movie if it didn't have Gotham City in it. So, in summary, I wish it was a better film. It does have a couple good scenes in it. I still think George Clooney could do a good job as Batman and another feature. I know other people have said that before. You can see what they were going for. I do think it unfortunately borrows too much from Batman Forever, especially in structural terms. But again, I don't think it's the worst film ever made. It's definitely not. Like I said, it's got a handful of good scenes in it, so that's more than most. Get the Technicolor and Kodak credits, Dolby, DTS, ASDDS. So that's going to do it for me and my commentary for Batman and Robin. Thanks again for listening. And as always, humbly yours, the Motion Picture Analyst.